Hello and welcome to Barbara's podcast. This is the show for women, all about health, nutrition, and wellness. It's the show that will empower you and inspire you to create a healthier lifestyle.
Okay. Well, hello and welcome. I'm Barbara Carafocus, and I'm thrilled to introduce Alexandria CEO. She's a functional nutritionist who specializes in fertility and preconception health. She's also the founder and CEO of Poplin, the first pre-pregnancy wellness company. Welcome, Alexandria.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here with you today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. So, in your book, you mention that reproductive anxiety is on the rise. What is that? What is this anxiety, and what are some of the reasons why it's worse now than it was for prior generations?
Yeah. So reproductive anxiety, as I look at it, is feelings that people have, feelings of concern that people have when thinking about their ability to get pregnant or the health of their future children. And this has been on the rise. And so I've talked to, at this point, hundreds and surveyed thousands and thousands of women. And usually the average number I get on a scale from 1 to 10 is 7. And that's regardless of their personal health history or family health history. So just in general, I think there's more awareness around fertility. And I think there's a lot of things driving that. But the way that I talk about reproductive anxiety, and this is not from the perspective of a mental health provider, which I am not, this is the perspective of someone who's worked with lots and lots of individuals who are trying to conceive, is that anxiety can result when there's a gap between the importance of something and the level of control that we feel we have over something. And in this case, having children for many people is incredibly high importance. But many individuals, particularly females, have been told that there's nothing that you can do except, have gotten pregnant when you were younger. Right? And that's not helpful to anyone. So there's this gap. High importance, low control situations create anxiety. And so I think that is what is happening. And so, my message to everyone, which I'm sure we're going to get into today, is you have so much more agency over your reproductive health than you may have been led to believe. And so there are many, many things that you can do to optimize your fertility, whether it's a first pregnancy or a fifth pregnancy, whether you're 23 or you're 43. There's so much hope, and there's so many things that can be done to optimize. But I think that's part of what's happening. And I think what's driving it to the other piece of the question you're asking is infertility statistics globally are on the rise. So there are more cases where people are struggling to conceive. And I think people are around either friends, family, colleagues who have had infertility struggles, and watching that concerns other people, and they would like to do whatever they can to avoid infertility themselves.
Yes, I absolutely agree. I think there is a lot that they can do, whether they change their environment, their stress, nutrition, but I'm sure we'll go into that. So, as you are one of the few preconception experts in the world, can you describe what a preconception expert is and talk about what makes this role so important?
Absolutely. Yes. So, I think it's interesting when we think about preconception is this forgotten period. And what it really means is preconception is the time before and between pregnancies. And traditionally in healthcare, we think about either with females, contraception, so preventing pregnancy, or pregnancy. We kind of forget about this intervening step around preconception. And preconception is really important because it does two main things. When we prepare in the preconception period, it increases the probability of being able to conceive more easily, and it increases the probability of having a healthy pregnancy and baby. So those are two very important things, helping with fertility and then helping with the health of a future child. And what I would say is that fertility is a subset of preconception. Preconception is kind of the umbrella. When we think about fertility, oftentimes it's a binary. It's an on-off switch. Like, did you get pregnant or did you not get pregnant, right? And that's kind of where it ends. However, for most of the individuals that I've spoken with, it's not about getting pregnant, right? It's about having a healthy child. And so if we only focus on the fertility side of it, we're missing many of the things that people really care about. And the cool thing is that many of the actions that you would take to optimize preconception are also the things that optimize fertility. So it's, kind of, you are able to tackle two birds with one stone in the sense of being able to optimize both fertility and the health of a future pregnancy.
Do you advise people perhaps like the 3-month rule, like 3 months before to prepare, or more than that?
So ideally, I recommend about a year in advance. So kind of just like we would prepare for a wedding. I was just looking at stats in the US, which says that the average person is preparing for a wedding for 15 months.
Oh my goodness.
Yep. That's what the stats say. And here in the US, the average price of a wedding is $33,000. So it's 15 months and $33,000 that we're dedicating culturally to our weddings. And, I would suggest not necessarily that you have to dedicate $33,000, but I do think that a commensurate amount of time is what the literature suggests. And so I think what you are talking about with 3 months is a good gauge, because that's essentially aligns with the last stage of egg maturation and the sperm development cycles. They're both about 3 months, but oftentimes you may need multiple of those cycles to upgrade your health to the level where you have optimal egg quality and optimal sperm quality, to where you would feel comfortable passing that health onto a future child, which is exactly what's happening in the preconception period. And that's where this concept of generational health comes in. So generally speaking, I recommend to give people about a year and certainly your starting point, everyone's starting point is different. So if you happen to have been much more health conscious, you may be able to shorten that timeline a little bit. And if you have multiple chronic conditions that you are managing, or if you've been on hormonal birth control for quite a while, that can take some time for your body to readjust after coming off of it. So you may want to give yourself an even wider birth.
Yeah. So if someone had to make a change, what do you think is the single most important thing someone can do to enhance fertility and increase their likelihood of having a healthy children or a healthy child?
So I would say probably the biggest thing is to change their mindset around what affects fertility. I think historically we've been told that age is the biggest predictor of fertility, or kind of the only predictor of fertility. And once you turn, take your pick, 35, you turn into a pumpkin, too bad, so sad for you, right? That's been the traditional narrative. And that is not true. And I think it is very disempowering. And so I think one of the fundamental things to understand is that there is a big difference for most people between their chronological age, meaning their age in years. So if we kind of look at their birth certificate, we can all agree on their chronological age, their age in years, versus their biological age, so the vitality of their cells. And while we cannot control our chronological age, meaning the number of years that we have actually been on this planet, we can modify our biological age, which is the vitality of our cells again, through our diet, our lifestyle, our supplementation, right? Community, all of these things are modulators for our health. And so I think that's really one of the big things that I want people to understand, is that, we've been given this edict that, there's nothing that we can do except, reverse our age, our chronological age, or have gotten pregnant younger. But that's just not true, and the data doesn't support it. And, in fact, there's been shown to only be a 4% difference in reproductive rates for individuals who are in their late 30s versus individuals who are even in their early 30s, or like late 20s to early 30s. So it's not as precipitous of a difference as people have been led to believe.
Yeah. Well, so what are the biggest benefits of planning and preparing for pregnancy before someone wants to get pregnant?
Yes. So I touched on this a little bit.
Yeah,
right, exactly. I think it's worth reiterating. I was mentioning it a little bit earlier, but number one is it improves the chances of getting pregnant in the first place. And then number two is it improves the probability of having a healthy pregnancy and baby. And the reason in particular on the second one is that, it has been shown that the health of both parents at conception is what's translated to your baby and sets the trajectory for their lifelong health. And so that is really important. There are epigenetic markers on egg and sperm that are then passed to the baby. And so that sets the stage. And so, we used to think, oh, okay, well, it's actually, for a baby, the first 1,000 days of life was, the most important developmentally. And it is, it's very important. And then we said, okay, well, actually, like we probably want to move earlier because pregnancy itself is really developmentally important. And then we said, okay, we actually probably want to move earlier. And so now, when we think about the developmental origins of disease is kind of what it's called, and we think about the impact, it starts all the way in preconception with the health of both reproductive parents. And that's why this period of time is so powerful, because it has such knock-on effects, not only on your health and your reproductive partner's health, but the health of your future children for generations to come even.
Many women believe that fertility rapidly declines after age 35. Where does that idea come from? And is it true?
Yeah. So that idea is coming from birth records from like hundreds of years ago. And so I think it's, it's something that is outdated, to say the least. And, I think the reality is that age does matter, but it is not as big of a factor as people have been led to believe. And this gets to a little bit of what I was talking about before about the difference between biological age and chronological age. Today in medicine, particularly in fertility, all 30-year-olds are created equal. All 40-year-olds are created equal. But we know that's not true, just even in our practical experiences in life. We certainly probably all know the 25-year-old who looks 10 or 15 years older, or, the 45-year-old who looks 10 or 15 years younger. And the way we live our lives affect how our cells are functioning and how vibrant they are. And, this is not going to be a surprise to you or any of, anyone in your audience where you talk about all of these things, but the way that you live your life determines the quality of your cells. And egg cells and sperm cells are cells just like any other. And so, the data suggests that even at 40 years old, the average woman has at least 10,000 eggs left. So this is all to say that this idea that there is, an egg cliff and things, are falling off precipitously is just not true. Yes, there is a decline in egg quantity as we age. And because of that, egg quality is even more important. And that is something that we can modify. And it's not just that egg quality declines, without any intervention by us. We can actually do things to mitigate those declines. And so it's much more empowering, I think, to focus on the egg quality side of the equation, which we can modulate, versus the egg quantity side, which we can't currently modulate. So I think that's a much more empowering approach. And basically at any age, egg quality is more important than egg quantity. And egg quantity is only relevant for, low egg quantity is only relevant for about 5% of the population. So it's a small percentage of individuals. And I think a lot of females have been scared about this, but it doesn't apply to the vast majority of the population.
What 3 steps could a woman take to increase her egg quality?
So I'd say the philosophy is basically increase the quality of your life, right? At a high level. And so the couple ones that I would point out are, first is probably around nutrition. I'm a nutritionist, so that is, the first and foremost. I think diet is one of the biggest modulators of our health. And so there it's choosing as much as possible more nutrient dense foods. I think a lot of times when we think about diet, we think about what to pull out and we think about downside.
Yeah.
And that can be helpful, but that's not the only piece. We can think about how do we use our diet to increase upside and to increase vitality. And a lot of times we're eating less food and more food-like substances. We're eating things that have been processed and are devoid of nutrients. And so as much as possible, we want to be getting lots and lots and lots of nutrient density. So nutrient density, traditionally a fertility-friendly diet is moderate to high fat, moderate carbohydrate, and moderate protein for most individuals. There may be some specifications for your own situation, but that's generally speaking where fertility thrives. So I would say, there really start to think about nutrient density and balance, diversity of the sorts of foods that you're getting into your diet. Second, I would say to really be conscious about environmental toxins. And, certainly the US is a bit behind some other countries on this. So, if you happen to live outside of the US, you may have different formulations for products than we do here in the US. But globally, I still think, this is something that we can do a lot better on, which is that there's tons and tons of chemicals that can interrupt and interfere with our endocrine system. So they're called endocrine disrupting chemicals. There's a whole host of them, and they are in our air and our water and our personal care products and our home care products, all these chemicals. And in small quantities, right, maybe not that big of a deal. Our bodies do detoxify, but at the volume and pace that we are exposed to on a daily basis, it's really hard for our bodies to keep up. Yeah. And what happens is you have competition with your own hormones from these external sources of hormone mimicking chemicals. And then your body doesn't know what to do. So it may downregulate your hormone production, or it may upregulate your hormone production inappropriately in response to these products. So as much as possible, choosing not only clean products, because clean doesn't always mean fertility friendly, but products that do not have endocrine disrupting chemicals in them, and that can take some time.
Okay. What do you think of coffee and alcohol? How much would that affect someone's fertility?
Yeah, so I think that there's varied data on this topic. And I think whenever you see varied data, there's a couple of reasons for that. One is because how someone can handle coffee and alcohol is partly predicated on the rest of their life. In other words, right, coffee and alcohol are both things that are processed in our bodies, processed by our livers. And so if we have a lot of other toxins coming in, then your body may have a harder time processing them. If you happen to lead a cleaner lifestyle overall, then the impact of alcohol and coffee may be smaller. That being said, there are also genetic differences in the way that we process alcohol and caffeine, how quickly our body processes it. So someone who is able to process it quickly has less of an impact because it stays in the body for a shorter period of time. That being said, there has been a dose-dependent relationship, or like an inverse dose-dependent relationship, between the amount of coffee consumed and the amount of alcohol consumed and time to pregnancy. Meaning, the more cups of coffee, the longer the time to pregnancy. The more drinks of alcohol, the longer to the time to pregnancy. So we have seen those correlations across the board.
Okay. And stress, a lot of people are stressed. So
yeah.
what do you think? How do you think stress would affect someone if they're very, very stressed person, leading a stressful life?
Living in the modern day world.
In the modern day world, yeah.
So stress is a really interesting one, because your stress hormones and your sex hormones are in the same biochemical pathway. And biologically speaking, our body will always prioritize survival over procreation. So what that means is if you are consistently stressed out, your body will divert resources from making your sex hormones to making your stress hormones. And then you literally will not have the raw materials to get a regular cycle, and certainly in many cases not sustain a pregnancy. So that is the connection. And so once we understand that, what we realize is that our modern environment in a lot of cases is basically saying to our bodies, this is not a safe environment in which to get pregnant. And so we have to understand that and try to coax our body back into a state that's receptive to conception. And so, stress can be perceived in a lot of different ways. There are physiological stressors, and then there are psychological stressors. So understanding what is at play for you is an important first step. Physiologically, right, an undiagnosed infection can be causing physiological stress. Marathon training can be causing physiological stress. Not sleeping can be causing physiological stress. That's all on the physiological side. On the psychological side, not liking your job or not liking where you live, right? These are chronic low-level stressors that are going on all the time. And so the goal here is ideally to eliminate any chronic stressor that you can. It's not the acute stressors that are a big deal. Like if you have a big presentation at work and you're really nervous about that, and then you give the presentation and that tension goes away, that's not a big deal. We were designed for acute stress, like the proverbial running from a lion, tiger, or bear, right? Yeah. but it's the chronic stressors, the ones that are low level, always on, that really drain our resources. So for any one of those that you can eliminate, I usually suggest try to eliminate that. And for those that we cannot eliminate, because sometimes we can't leave our job, for example, right? We ideally want to try to reframe the relationship to that, right? So, okay, I can't leave my job right now, but it is giving me an income that's going to allow me to pursue this passion or allow me to support my family. Or if it's a commute that you're really not liking, right? Can we do small things to improve that experience? If you're sitting in traffic 2 hours a day, can we add a playlist that we really enjoy? Can we listen to audiobooks? Can we call friends, right? Can we change that situation from one that is draining us to one that is invigorating us?
Yeah. Well, thank you. So I'd like to take you to talk a little bit about IVF and what your opinion is on that for couples who have been trying, but then, see that as an option.
Sure. Yeah, so IVF, or in vitro fertilization, is something that I think is, a marvel of modern medicine. I think it's incredible because it has increased access to reproductive care for individuals that historically may not have had access to it. So this includes people who've undergone chemotherapy, for example, people who may have had, people who are in same-sex relationships, people who may have certain things that would have prevented them from being able to get pregnant naturally. That is a beautiful thing. And I think it is also being used for people who do not fall into those buckets far too often. And it's being treated as a first resort rather than a last resort. And even there's a reproductive endocrinologist who kind of does this work all day, every day in Manhattan. And he has said that he thinks up to 50% of IVF is unnecessary. 50%. And I think that is partly because people are being told that they can do nothing or do IVF. And there's nothing in between those two things. And I would argue there's tons of stuff in between those two things, but no one is really being given the options. And so I think it's really important to understand the ramifications of IVF. There are financial ramifications, emotional ramifications, physical ramifications. It is not a de minimis process. And so I think understanding what are all the things that I can potentially do to understand the underlying factors that may be contributing to my challenges conceiving, because that can be helpful whether you try naturally or on the next round of IVF. And it could potentially decrease the number of IVF cycles that you need to go through if you can optimize some of these underlying factors that are affecting your ability to conceive. Because the IVF failure rate is about 72%, meaning 72% of the time the cycles are failing. So only about 30% of the time are they successful. So understanding that going in, oftentimes people have to have multiple cycles to achieve their goals.
Which takes a toll, I suppose, financially, physically, and emotionally. It's not an easy cycle to go through.
Yeah.
So what would be some of the top fertility blockers today? What do you recommend people do to start removing those blocks?
Yes. So we touched on a few of them, but I think, nutrition is a big one. This concept of what we're eating less food, more food-like substances. We're eating foods that are highly calorie dense, but they're not very nutrient dense, which essentially means that our bodies think that we're starving. We are getting food, but we're starving for nutrients. And, this is vitamins and minerals and phytochemicals. So I think, that's one really big one. And diet is such a foundational piece of fertility. Food is information. It gives your body information about how to build the cells of your, by your infrastructure, basically. So that's a really important one. Another one is stress, which we talked about, understanding this mechanism where the body will always prioritize survival over procreation, and understanding, how do we optimize our lifestyles so that our body feels that we are in a safe environment in which to conceive. Another one is environmental chemicals, which we touched on, where we want to be removing a lot of these things that can interfere with our own hormonal cascade. There's also movement, right? I think in the last couple of decades, the number of sedentary jobs has gone up meaningfully, and that means that we're sitting for longer periods of time. And when we're sitting for long periods of time, we essentially compress our reproductive organs. And that a lot of times can create stagnation. And when we have stagnation, we do not have the flow of oxygen and nutrients throughout our body, but certainly not in our reproductive organs. So as much as possible, even putting exercise aside, right, just movement, getting up from a seated position or standing at standing desks or walking, right, those sorts of things allow our circulation to move. And then for all the wonderful nutrition that you're now putting into your body to be digested, assimilated, and then to move into your cell structures.
I would add in a little and de-stressing techniques like breathing exercises, maybe a little bit of yoga, just to, I think that would help them as well, I think, to tackle in addition to what you've said.
Sure, absolutely.
So in closing, if someone would like to get in touch with you or to read your book, where could they reach you?
Thanks for asking, Barbara. So the book is called 9 Months is Not Enough, and it's available where all books are sold. It's on Amazon. You can also go to our website, 9monthsisnotenough.com, the number 9, and then you can learn a little bit more. You can download the first chapter if you want to take a peek at it, and you can also get links there for other places where the book is sold. And then the company that I run is called Poplin, and then we do pre-pregnancy testing. So if you're interested in understanding a little bit more about the factors that may be at play for you when you're thinking about your pre-pregnancy wellness status, that is something that we do, and that's at getpoplin, GETPOPLIN.com.
Okay, well, it was lovely having you as a guest. And I'm sure. No, it was my pleasure. It was my pleasure. And I'm sure our audience will I'm sure, get lots of gems and some valuable insights from this podcast. So
I hope so. Thank you for your time, Barbara. And thank you to everyone for listening.
Thanks for listening to Barbara's podcast. Don't forget to sign up for our newsletter or e-courses. Celebrate life, and see you at the next episode.